Election coverage all over the world is usually subject to diverse interpretations. A number of political analysts have called it a delicate balancing act, which pushers of various political and economic agenda are always looking to exploit under the guise of ideology. In Edo State over the last weekend, was any of that on display? How well did the media, Nigerian and foreign, acquit themselves regarding the coverage of the Edo governorship election? Joining us now to look back at it all is Lanre Arogundade, Executive Director, International Press Center, and a former chairman of the Nigerian Union of Journalists, Lagos State Council. Lanre Arogundade, good morning. Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us on the morning show. Yes, how are you? Well,
fine, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Now, before we begin to assess the role that the media played in the just concluded Edo State gubernatorial election, we'd like to have your take on the entire process. Do you think that that was a free, fair, credible election in which the various agencies of government acquitted themselves honorably, and that the outcome should not give anyone any heartache, particularly as there was no large-scale report of violence, which everyone had suspected will mar the process?
Well, if we look back to the Kogi elections and some other elections before it, I think we would say that the Edo election was far better. I thought that this time around we saw an INEC that was better prepared, and that was reflected in the way and manner the election results were released. I do recall that you had an extensive interview with Mr. Festus Okoye on your program, where you were actually putting him to task on the preparedness of INEC. And he did say on that occasion that results will be collated at the polling, will be declared at the polling units before they go to the collation centers, and that if a political party had agents in all the polling units, they would have known the results, have initial. So the fact that they were able to have all these results in the collation units and then also get them electronically uploaded, confirmed, what Festus Okoye, was saying. So I would say that it was a fairer, performance. We wouldn't say it was 100% really, because there are other side issues that we still need to contend with. The question of, vote buying, the fact that some thugs still managed to snatch ballot boxes in very few places. So the only reason why Abasheki was declared winner was that the returning officer said that if you looked at the cancelled results and the gap with which Obaseki won, it didn't significantly affect the elections. But like I said, even if you look at the conduct of the security agencies and the general atmosphere, I would say that it was a better performance, and there are lessons to learn from this. And one of the lessons really is the fact that we need to look in the direction of fundamental electoral reforms. And electronic technology definitely has a role to play in ensuring credible elections in Nigeria.
Thank you, Mr. Arogundade. Now, discussions about the media's function in the electoral context usually focus around that watchdog role that the media plays. But let's talk about other aspects of ensuring the fullest public participation possible. We often refer to voter apathy and the causes thereof. At line, we blame the security agencies. Maybe there's a threat of, instability or violence. We blame INEC, the Nigerian Orientation Agency. But what role can the media play? Specifically, the Edo State election, there was a historically low turnout of about 25%. That's pretty shocking. Is there a role for the media in trying to encourage, voter turnout and stop voter apathy so we actually do get a proper mandate?
Well, there's a role for the media, and you would agree with me that in terms of voter education, the media did its best in terms of, carrying jingles. I was in Edo State 2 weeks of the election as part of a program supported by the European Union Support to Democratic Governance in Nigeria. We had the live TV program between my organization and the Institute for Media and Society. And there were a lot of voter education programs by different civil society groups. The low turnout cannot be blamed on the media. I think it's a reflection of apathy, the fact that Nigerians feel sometimes that elections are not, worth it, especially if you look at the context of the fact that when they vote politicians into office, they rarely deliver, on those promises. One of the unfortunate things in the Edo election was the fact that it was difficult for the media to actually put the issues on the table. And so when we look at the agenda setting, which Dr. Abati was talking about, what we saw in Edo again was the politicians actually setting their own agenda, and media reportage more or less tailed what the politicians, wanted. So invariably, the narrative was about Osiomole versus Obaseki, and it was actually, in a sense, less of Obaseki versus Eze Iyamu in terms of the programs. It was only a few days of the elections that we had live, debates by Arise TV, by Channels TV, where the candidates spoke about what they wanted to do. But largely, the reports were more about, lions and tigers and the rest, of them. And I think it's cause for concern that in a state where about 2 million registered to vote, only 500,000, did, which meant that, in a sense, what you have in power is a minority government, if you look at it that way. So for me, the challenge that this poses for the media is, what do we do after the elections? Because one of the things we have observed is that we go to sleep after elections. By now, I expect each news medium that covered the Edo elections to have all the campaign promises of Governor Obaseki. And the next thing will be to begin to take them to task on the fulfillment of these campaign promises. That is what is called democratic accountability. So it is lack of democratic accountability that is largely responsible for the apathy that we are witnessing. And also maybe people also feel that there's actually no difference between these two political parties. And so to that extent, look at Edo State. Eze Iyamu was PDP 4 years ago. It was APC this year. The governor who even boasted of all his achievements, these achievements were done under APC. He was running on PDP. So the fact that people really feel that there isn't any choice between these two parties could possibly be responsible for the voter apathy that we are witnessing.
Right. A lot of people say hindsight is always 20/20, like they say. What will have been a proper...
A lot of people say what?
A lot of people say hindsight is 20/20. There's a very good clarity of vision when you look from hindsight. What will have been a proper agenda for this election that would have dealt with these three scenarios? Increase, voter turnout, because those are appalling numbers. 25%, like you said, Tudu, those are appalling numbers. And you are safe to say it's a minority government, Secondly, deepen participation among the other candidates. I'm talking about the 12 other candidates, because this election was just about Eze Iyamu and Obaseki. All have been a better approach by the media to be able to balance out those two case scenarios.
Well, in the first instance, I thought that the media should have done more in looking at the situation on the ground. We gave the impression that there was going to be violence. Truly, the political leaders were talking about violence. They were talking about some lions and tigers. But when I visited Edo State 2 weeks to the elections, alongside other groups, the atmosphere was actually, relatively, peaceful. And they were saying that, well, we are okay here. We don't know what you people are, really, talking about. I felt that we should have done more, going around, the state, going around the local government, and highlighting, talking to people, doing opinion poll. On what basis would you vote, for this or this, candidate? And let the people know that they have a stake in the kind of choice that they are going, to make. By the time the whole thing looked as if there was going to be violence, and then the Inspector General of Police now said they were deploying 30,000 policemen, and all that kind of itself gave a kind of siege mentality. And I had a feeling that there were people who probably would have wanted to vote but hesitated because of, the fear, of violence. So we need to be more balanced in our reporting. We're not saying we should conceal facts of likely violence. It's always good for the media to give early warning, signals. But let us also try and localize, the facts. We can be factually accurate. An organization like a Clean Foundation, for example, did a security assessment of electoral violence in Edo State. And they were able to isolate some areas and say, if I thought there would be violence, it would likely be in these areas. So we need to report such things so that we don't give an impression of a siege that can actually discourage people, or probably discourage people in these last elections. Now, as for deepening participation, this is a major flaw, and I'm really wondering how we would address it, because election reporting in Nigeria has always been skewed in favor of the biggest political parties. The argument in favor of that is to say, well, they are the ones that have the resources, they are the ones campaigning, and so on and so forth. But the others too, are active, and we have a responsibility to also report these other candidates and their programs. Even where it's clear that probably the election will be between PDP and APC, the beauty of that is also that these people are also speaking for some people in Edo State. They are speaking for their party. Those parties have members, and they also have programs. And we can use their own programs to even challenge the so-called big political parties to say, these candidates are saying this. So to that extent, it would have enabled us to put as many issues as possible on the table. And I do not think that we really put enough issues on the table as far as these elections are concerned. I spoke with people who said that as of performance, Obaseki did well in some local governments, in some areas he didn't do well. These are the kind of things that we need to see. Sampling of public opinion, going around talking to people, asking them what would they expect of the incoming government in that state? What are your priorities? And if we do more of this, which is quite scientific and doable, I believe we'll be able to set what we can call a public interest agenda in this in elections, which we didn't actually set in those elections, if we have to be frank with ourselves.
Well, quickly, Lanre Arogundade, I don't agree that what has emerged is a minority government. The key issues in a democratic process is representation, and that representation is about persons of voting age. It's not everybody that will vote. You can then decide strategies to make sure that people turn out on election day. The second big issue is legitimacy. Is the process legitimate? Yes, I think it is. And, I agree with you. Obaseki deserves the victory that he has been able to achieve.
No,
but let me ask you.
Definitely.
Yes, let me ask you. You were in Edo, you said 2 weeks before the election. Now, one of the major issues in terms of media performance is that during elections, we tend to see the incumbent government using the state-owned media to serve its own interest to the exclusion of the interest of the opposition also participating in the election. And then you find the opposition alleging that the sitting government is using the local media to serve its own propaganda purposes, whereas these are publicly owned organs. Did you observe anything in this direction while you were in Edo State? And what will you say to our colleagues in that regard?
Yes, obviously. But just before I go to that, let me say that, I didn't say that this Obaseki's emergence is not legitimate. It's quite legitimate. It's clear that it was the choice of the people, and it's good that we have an election that reflected the choice of the people. Now, in terms of using, state media, this is about the electoral law, because the Electoral Act in Section 100, I think, states that there's, the state apparatus, including the media, shall not be used to the advantage of political party and candidates. And we saw that clearly in Edo State. Incidentally, why I was smiling when you raised that question was that our live TV program where we talked about, we did some voter education, was actually at the Edo Broadcasting Service. And so we started our program, I think, like around 8 a.m. So we're there very early. And between 7 to 8, the station was running this news. And, the first news was about Obaseki campaigning. And then after that, then they went to the deputy governor doing some official assignments. And when they were to report, the activities of the others, I think they just picked one or two other political parties. And myself and Dr. Akingbulu, sitting down there at reception, we're just nodding to ourselves that this coverage is already skewed. So the state broadcasting service was obviously being used to the advantage of the incumbent. But that is a trend everywhere else. And this is one of the shortcomings of our electoral laws, because we have it in the Electoral Act. We even have it in the Nigerian Media Code of Election Coverage that as much as possible, we should give balanced view. So we didn't see that. Whether that was a factor as to why he won is a different thing. But I think that we need to address this. The media should give equitable opportunity for political parties and candidates. And during elections, we have to separate reporting government's activities, because sometimes these are just like campaigns as against, what they've actually done. So for me, this was also, a minus in terms of what the electoral law and the electoral frameworks actually state.
Thank you. Let's talk about the erosion of trust in the media in general in this era of fake news and how campaigns of false information have really taken hold as a political weapon. What can the media do to sort of redeem themselves in the eyes of the public? Because it used to be a sense of traditional media was more trustworthy than social media, but now it appears that everybody's been tarred with the same brush.
Well, you see, we need to work more in the area of the accuracy of our reports and also trying to, get deals. So if we take the Edo election again, the point we're making really is that most of our reportage were based on what was coming from, party spokespersons, party leaders, who invariably, are spin doctors. They want the news to favor them. So they raise allegations. They say the other party is the one, recruiting talks and so on. The media needs to do more to get independent views. We need to invest more in investigations. I thought that we ought to have had about, 10 media organizations, major media organizations, going around, Edo State before that election and giving, reports of what is on the ground, what is likely, to be. Now we need to do this in other spheres, in the larger, society, so that we can begin to gain that, trust back, from the people. Because without the public trust, the media is actually, nothing. And for me, this is where, we're having, problem. The tendency for people to think that the media is compromised, one way or the other. And the only way we can disprove that is to show in our reporting that, we have, interest. I think that media outlets need to also begin to define their interests. We do say that one of the problems with politics in Nigeria is that there are no ideologies. I think we, the media, need to adopt ideology. We should stand for something. We should know a newspaper that would always pursue anything that has to do with health. We should know a TV station that when it comes to education, it's one of their top priorities. So that way, your reporting can focus on developmental issues around these areas. So I feel that the media too needs to be ideological. What is actually our stand on issues of development in our country, and put them at the forefront of our reporting. It will take some time, but I believe that things can begin to gradually change if we do not, relent. What is important is that it will take time for us to catch up with the social media, but even as we do that, let us ensure that we refrain, from fake news. Let us ensure that our reports actually help Nigerians to make, informed opinion. But I must also say that one of the things we noticed in Edo State, that it's allow me to mention this, was also the fact that some journalists were still harassed during that election. So hopefully we need to do more with security agencies. Samson Adenekon of Premium Times, Nathaniel Ife of GTV were assaulted in Ward 10 in Esako West while trying to cover some outbreak of violence in that area. And at least 3 journalists, Samuel Ajala, Maswell Osita, and Alamun Dolapo, were denied access to the collation center in Oka local government. We hope that INEC and security agencies will work to prevent this kind of situation in future. But back to your main question, we do have a lot to do, but I think it's actually possible to win back the confidence of the public. And through programs like this could help. Well, one of the things I've seen in Arise TV, not because I'm here, was that in that political process, you always ensure that you brought people from opposing opinions, and that helps. That helps credibility, and that is what we need to do. Especially for the state media, they just have to do it, because you are in government today, you'll be out of government tomorrow, and what you denied could also be denied you in future. I just hope that politicians will learn this lesson.
Okay. I want to talk about the balancing act here for journalists, and I want to talk about that tag of neutrality that you're supposed to have. You said, we should know a station that is educational, developmental issue, but in foreign climes, you have media organizations that are right-leaning, that are libertarian in nature, some that are conservative in nature, and you know where they stand, even on very top political issues. And you even have, newspapers and media outlets that come out to take a stance, even in an election, on a candidate, to go ahead and endorse a candidate and say, okay, these are my reasons and the likes. But in Nigeria, we still have that air of, oh, you should be seen as neutral. Do you think that boxes us in a corner?
Well, I do not think that the media should be neutral on issues of public interest. There's absolutely, nothing wrong with that. We shouldn't be neutral. We should be able to say that in this particular election, this is what the people are looking at. And this is the reason why they will vote, for a candidate. As individual journalists, we have, our preferences. We can decide to vote for parties of our choice. But what we're also saying is that you can be strong on issues, you can be leaning, but when you are now reporting the political process, as long as you are reporting, political process or the campaigns, you must give opportunity to diverse sides to state their own opinion. So the fact that you are conservative or you are leaning towards it does not mean that you should shut out the other political parties. In our own context, that will be violating our own code of ethics and the Nigerian media code of election coverage. Now, in terms of endorsement, this is a very contentious issue. I personally do not have anything to do with, I don't have any problem with that because endorsements are at the level of the editorial board. It's more or less the opinion of the publisher, the totality to say that because of all these issues, we feel that this candidate would help our nation or our state better in this period. But beyond that, it's also the fact that when you're now reporting, when you're now doing your stories in the editorials, your reports must be balanced. You must give equitable access to the different political parties, and that is the way we can go about it. In an ideal situation, we might say it creates a problematic. If you endorse, will you then be able to give a balanced report? It's neither here nor there. But the reason I say that is that, you see, if a nation is completely adrift, I do not think there is anything wrong for the media to say that at this point in time, we need an alternative because things have really, gone too bad. Well, this is something that, this is a debate that will continue for a long time. Maybe it's a matter of academic, exercise. But what is important is that we must not deny people the opportunity to know, to hear, to see candidates and political parties standing in elections.
Well, Lanre Arogundade, I like the way you have defined the responsibility of the media and the expectations of the average journalist. But where does the burden really lie? Because you realize that there is the ownership factor. Many of these media houses we're talking about are not necessarily controlled by the reporters, the editors. And if you look at the ownership profile in Nigeria, most of our media organs are owned either by politicians or government contractors or persons with ethnic bias and or religious bias. And that really puts the journalist who goes to the field in a very tight situation. Do you want to address that quickly before we go? Yeah,
it's a problem that won't go away soon. It will always be there. But I also feel that we now have greater media pluralism. And, Dr. But you would agree with me that we do now have alternatives. And I think this is where the online media has actually helped. And one of the things we tell, reporters in our training is to say the fact that do not be discouraged, really. And what is important is for you to be, a good, journalist. There are international media organizations, for example, that will use your story if, your medium, refuses, to use them. So the diversity that we're having in the media landscape is now making it possible for stories that will not go into in a particular medium to go out there, in another, news medium, especially in the online environment. So for me, that really helps. And I also feel that it also poses a challenge for journalists to do more of, to acquire more skill and knowledge, in business, so that, they could also be in a position, to manage their own, media outlets and hopefully hopefully that will give them, greater independence to do the kind of stories that they would normally do. Well, you see, it's not also always about, ownership. We have to be frank with ourselves. Sometimes some of our colleagues are guilty of over-censorship. And again, sometimes it's also about the kind of editor, the type of editor.
Well, looks like we lost him there. Lanre Arogundade, if you're still hearing me, we would like to thank you very much for joining us and for looking at the Edo election from the angle of media participation in that process. Thank you. Well, Lanre, I was just thanking you. We lost audio connection with you.
Last point, Dr. Abati, sorry to take your time. That, again, we cannot always blame publishers for the problem that you analyzed. That I was features editor when Bashir M.K. Abiola was running for presidency in 1993, features editor of National Concord. And because of the kind of editorial team we had, the editor was Sikak Essien. The National Concord then had a policy that on our front page, if we had a story on SDP or MKO Abiola, who was our publisher, we must also have a story from the NRC. You know, that time we had just, two political parties. So throughout that electioneering period, on the front page of National Concord, whenever you see a story on SDP, you will see another story on NRC. So for me, sometimes too, it's about the courage that we bring to this job. Although sometimes it could be costly, but we should not always, blame publishers for this. Let us even try to give this access and let's see how the publishers react so that we don't always put the blame on their table. Thank you very much.
Okay, although he who pays the piper dictates the tune, as you know very well. Thank you very much, Lanre Arogundade, for joining us this morning on The Morning Show.